The tavern called it sunset, but Elias Blackwood knew the color bleeding across the sky was the same shade that had once slicked the decks of the Revenant, a red so thick you could stand a cutlass in it. He rolled the tarnished doubloon across his knuckles, feeling the coin's bite of silver teeth against scarred skin, and watched Tortuga sink into its nightly ritual of drunken song, wet dice and wetter blades. 3 years ago the same harbor had echoed with his name shouted in fear and fury. Tonight no one even met his eyes. That was fine. Eyes carried questions and questions carried bullets. A warm wind carried the stink of tar, gunpowder and roasted turtle, but underneath it Elias caught the colder note of iron, chains being dragged across stone. The crowd outside the broken compass parted like water around a shark fin. Town crier, brass voice, paper scroll. Elias didn't need to read it, the words were always the same: thief, smuggler, runaway wench. Yet when the crier barked, Isla Morgan for the theft of 1 keg of His Majesty's rum, 7 years in the pits, Elias's thumb froze on the doubloon. Isla Morgan, a name he'd buried beneath gold and gun smoke, wrapped in sailcloth, and sunk somewhere off the Mosquito Coast. A name that should have stayed drowned. She stood between 2 red-coated Marines, wrists manacled, chin high enough to scrape the sky. 17, maybe 18, too young for the hollow look in her eyes, too proud for the bruises blooming across her cheek. Her hair, black as midnight water, hung in salt-stiff ropes. A single white shell glinted at her temple, the same shell her father had worn the night he handed Elias the map that changed everything. The crowd jeered. Someone threw a rotten lime, it burst against her shoulder but she never flinched. Instead, her gaze, storm-green, wild, imploring, found Elias across the lantern-lit square and held. In that instant the tavern noise vanished, replaced by the memory of another green-eyed girl screaming his name as flames licked the sky above Maracaibo. The doubloon slipped from Elias's fingers, clinked onto the table, and spun like a compass needle gone mad. He looked away first. That was the rule, never stare at the condemned, their ghosts follow. But the ghost was already beside him, whispering in his ear. Thomas Morgan saved your life with ink and parchment. His daughter is about to lose hers because of rum you could buy with that single coin. Behind him, a fiddler struck a shanty about sunken treasure and broken hearts. Elias tasted copper where he'd bitten his tongue. The smart play was to finish his drink, pay his tab and be gone before dawn. The smart play had kept him breathing for 3 quiet years. But the coin had stopped spinning, heads up, skull side. An omen or a dare? A Marine shoved Isla forward. She stumbled, chains rattling like dice in a dead man's cup. The sound scraped the raw edge of Elias's memory, Thomas Morgan's final letter, smuggled out on the eve of his hanging. If the sea ever brings my girl to your door, remember the debt you owe a dead man. Elias stood so fast his chair toppled. The fiddler missed a note, conversation stuttered, every scarred face in the tavern marked him. He felt the weight of recognition and the sharper weight of indifference. Once a pirate, always a target. He left 3 coins on the table, 1 for the rum, 2 for silence, and stepped into the humid night. Outside, the crier finished his proclamation. The soldiers dragged Isla toward the stone stairs that descended to the pits beneath the fort. Lantern light painted her shadow long and thin across the cobblestones, too much like a noose already tightening. She never looked back. Elias pressed a hand to the pistol hidden beneath his coat. 1 shot could drop a Marine, maybe 2, but 30 more waited inside the fort, and every musket carried his bounty price. Mathematics of suicide. Yet the image of Thomas Morgan's broken body twisting at the end of a manila rope refused to fade. The night smelled of coming rain and gun smoke that hadn't happened yet. Elias's pulse thrummed in his ears like distant cannon fire. He had 2 choices, both lethal. Walk away and let guilt finish what the Navy started, or walk forward and resurrect the monster the Caribbean thought it had drowned. Somewhere in the dark, a gull screamed. Elias turned up the collar of his coat, tasted salt and regret, and started after the fading clink of chains. The tavern shutters banged in the rising wind, but the sound inside Elias's skull was older. Canvas ripping, men screaming, the thud of a body swinging from the yardarm. He blinked, and the memory slammed him 5 years backward, to the lantern-lit deck of the Revenant and the stink of wet powder. Flashback, night 1708, Caribbean Sea. A moon the color of molten silver spilled across black water. Elias, 26 and drunk on victory, unrolled a goatskin chart across the capstan. Thomas Morgan, smuggler, father, unwilling cartographer, stood opposite, wrists raw from earlier manacles. Spanish galleon 2 days north, Thomas rasped. Gold enough to buy 10 ships. Elias traced the red ink route that curved like a cut vein across the parchment. What's the price, Thomas? My life. My girl's future. The smuggler's voice cracked. You get me safe to Port-au-Prince after you take the prize. A match flared. Elias touched it to his pipe, eyes never leaving the map. And if the Spaniards catch wind? Thomas pulled a small white shell from his pocket, the same shell Elias would later see in Isla's hair, and laid it on the chart like a signature. Then you remember this shell and you keep my name out of the noose. The deal was struck with a handshake that smelled of tar and betrayal. Present, Tortuga Docks, 1713. The memory snapped back like a mainsail catching wind. Elias's fingers found the doubloon again. It was no longer smooth. Thomas's dying curse had etched it with invisible guilt. He stepped deeper into the alley that smelled of piss and molasses. A lantern swung overhead, painting the cobblestones in nervous gold. From the fort came the metallic clack-clack of a musket being primed, Dawn's execution detail rehearsing. 4 hours until sunrise. Elias forced himself to breathe. The ledger in his mind opened. Credit side, 1 Spanish treasure galleon, 200,000 pieces of 8, a captaincy that bought silence from governors and knives in the dark. Debit side, Thomas Morgan hanged from a Port-au-Prince gibbet, his body left for gulls, his daughter orphaned, and Elias's soul mortgaged to the devil. He hadn't known about Isla until the letter arrived, 3 months late, smuggled inside a rum cask, the ink blurred by salt water. If the sea ever brings my girl to your door, remember the shell and the debt. Tim. The paper still lived in Elias's sea chest, folded small enough to fit behind the lining of his coat, directly over the scar where a Spanish bayonet had once tried to finish him. Tonight it burned like a brand. A cat yowled. Elias started. Down the alley 2 redcoats laughed, passing a bottle. Their silhouettes loomed like gallows posts. He ducked into a doorway, pulse drumming. Think damn you. Flashback, the gallows morning. Thomas stood on the scaffold, ankles chained, the white shell now gray with prison dust. The crowd chanted for blood. Elias, hidden in the throng, felt Thomas's eyes find him across 50 yards. No plea, no accusation, just a slow nod that said, I kept my word, you keep yours. Then the trapdoor fell, and the snap of rope echoed louder than any cannon. Present, flashback shattered. The alley reeked of smoke and rum. Elias tasted bile. He pulled the letter from his coat. The paper trembled as if still alive. For words underlined in Thomas's shaky hand, trust no uniform. Uniform. The Marines dragging Isla wore the same scarlet the governor's men had worn that morning 5 years ago. Elias's mind raced. The pits beneath the fort were a maze of limestone and iron. 1 bribed turnkey, 1 stolen key, and a girl could vanish into the surf. But every turnkey drank at the broken compass, and every coin Elias had was cursed. A church bell tolled midnight, 3 hours to dawn. Somewhere above, gulls screamed like dying men. Elias crushed the letter against his chest, feeling the shell's ghost between his fingers. He whispered to the darkness, Thomas, I spent your gold on silence. Tonight I spend my life on your daughter. Elias's boots scraped raw stone as he hauled himself up the fort's outer curtain, knuckles bleeding where barnacles clung like tiny razors. 30 feet below, black water slapped the rocks in a rhythm that sounded too much like a heartbeat counting down to sunrise. 2 hours, maybe less. A torch crackled on the parapet above. Its orange spill painted the wall in moving shadows, perfect cover if he timed his breath with the guards pacing. The stolen parchment map, now folded to the size of a prayer, burned against his ribs beneath the shirt. Ink still damp from Thomas Morgan's final hand, it showed not gold this time but a thin red line threading through the fort's bowels. A forgotten smuggler's tunnel, bricked up since the last war, ending in the pits where Isla was chained. The only key, the turnkey had slurred an hour ago, hangs around Pitmaster Shaw's neck like a damn crucifix. Elias reached the parapet lip and froze. The guard, a boy no older than 16, leaned on his musket, humming a shanty about mermaids who dragged sailors to hell. Wind carried the smell of tar and gunpowder. Somewhere inside the fort a bell tolled once, 1 hour, 45 minutes. Elias's pulse sank to it. He slipped over the wall like smoke, boots silent on wet stone. The courtyard stretched ahead, a killing ground of white sand and torchlight, with the pit entrance yawning like a mouth in the center. 2 more guards there, dice rattling against a crate. Elias tasted copper. The flintlock tucked in his belt was empty, no powder left after selling everything for the bribe. All he carried now was a 6-inch dagger, the map, and a promise carved into his soul. He dropped into the shadow of a powder barrel stack, counting heartbeats. 17 steps to the grate. A rat scurried over his boot, he didn't flinch. The dice game ended with a curse. One guard wandered toward the latrine. Opportunity or trap, no time to weigh. Elias moved. The grate was iron, crusted with salt and rust. He wedged the dagger between bars and levered. Metal screamed. The remaining guard spun, musket rising. Elias was already inside the stairwell, boots skidding on slime-slick stone. Torchlight flickered below, revealing walls sweating like fevered skin. The air turned thick, unbreathed for decades. At the bottom, a corridor branched left to the cells, right to the smuggler's tunnel. The map said the tunnel was sealed, but the mortar was old. Elias pressed his ear to the wall. He could hear the faint clink of chains, Isla's chains beyond the stone. He drew the dagger and began chipping, every scrape echoing like musket fire. 15 minutes bled away, his shoulders burned. Then the brick shifted, a fist-sized hole opening into pitch black. Cold air exhaled from the tunnel, smelling of seaweed and old bones. Elias thrust his arm through, fingertips found damp wood, an ancient door swollen shut. He braced his back against the wall and kicked. What? Twice. On the third, the door shattered inward with a sound like breaking ribs. Inside, the tunnel was narrower than the map promised. He crawled, elbows scraping, until the ceiling rose into a low chamber lit by a single guttering lantern. Isla knelt in the far corner, wrists shackled to a ring bolt set into the floor. Her green eyes widened when she saw him, not with relief but with warning. Behind her, Pitmaster Shaw stepped from the shadows, cutlass in one hand, the promised key in the other. "Knew you'd come, Blackwood," he rasped. "Governor's doubled the bounty on your head, dead or alive." "I prefer dead, corpses don't bite." Elias's dagger felt suddenly toy-like. Shaw was twice his size, the lantern glinting off brass knuckles shaped like shark's teeth. The key dangled like bait. 1 hour to dawn. Shaw lunged. Blade met blade in a shower of sparks. Elias parried, twisted, felt the cutlass notch his dagger. Isla yanked her chains, straining the ring bolt, loose mortar crumbled. Elias saw it, Shaw didn't. He feinted left, dropped low, and drove the dagger into Shaw's thigh. The pitmaster roared, backhanding Elias into the wall. Lantern oil spilled, fire licking across the floor like liquid sunrise. Smoke curled toward the ceiling. Somewhere above, the bell tolled again. 1 hour, 10 minutes. Isla screamed, "The ring, pull." Elias grabbed the chain with both hands, planted his boots, and heaved. The bolt tore free with a shriek of tortured iron. Shaw lunged again, but Isla swung the loose chain like a flail. Brass links cracked across his temple. He dropped, dazed. Elias snatched the key from Shaw's belt, fumbled it into Isla's manacles. The lock clicked open just as flames reached the powder keg stacked against the far wall, a trap set for any escape. He grabbed her wrist. "Run or burn." 047. The powder keg hissed like a nest of serpents. Elias's boots skidded on flaming oil as he yanked Isla toward the tunnel mouth. Behind them, Pitmaster Shaw roared, blood sheeting the side of his face where Isla's chain had split flesh from bone. The cutlass in his hand caught the firelight, turning every drop of sweat to molten gold. "Run!" Elias barked, voice raw from smoke. The tunnel ahead gaped, a throat of darkness that might collapse or might save them. Isla's hand was slick in his, her breath ragged, but she didn't hesitate. They dove as the first keg exploded. Boom, stone cracked. Shockwave punched lungs flat. Splinters of burning timber sighed the air. Elias felt his shoulder slam into wet rock. Isla's body shielded his as the world turned to thunder and red rain. 041. Smoke funneled through the passage like a living thing, clawing at eyes, branding throats. Elias blinked grit, saw Isla's silhouette ahead. She'd taken the lead, small fingers tracing the map's memory along the wall. Left at the fork, then down the ladder to the sea cave. Her father's ink bled in her mind the way blood now bled down Elias's arm. Behind them, Shaw's laugh echoed, mad, triumphant. "You'll burn with her, Blackwood?" Elias risked a glance. The pitmaster was a silhouette against hell's doorway, reloading a musket with shaking hands. Another keg sat at his feet, fuse already sparking like a star falling to earth. 034. They burst into a wider chamber, low ceiling, ankle-deep water. Moonlight knifed through a rusted grate overhead. The sea caved, but the tide had turned. Waves slapped the bars, hungry. Elias's heart sank. The grate was padlocked, iron thick as a man's wrist. Isla dropped to her knees, fingers scrabbling at the lock. "My father taught me this," she whispered, voice trembling but steady. She slipped the white shell from her hair, razor-edged, drilled with a tiny hole, and used it as a pick. Click, click, snap. The lock fell open. But the grate wouldn't budge. Rust welded hinges to stone. Elias threw his weight against it. Nothing. 027. Footsteps, Shaw's boots splashing closer, dragging the second keg. His face appeared in the tunnel mouth, firelight dancing across shark-tooth knuckles. No gold without blood, pirate. He jammed the musket's bayonet into the keg's fuse, shortening it to a sizzling inch. Elias's mind raced. One shot left in the flintlock, empty minutes ago, but Isla had palmed a single ball and powder from Shaw's belt. She pressed it into his palm now, eyes fierce. Make it count. 020. Shaw lifted the keg overhead like an offering to some ancient sea god. Elias raised the pistol. One heartbeat. Two. He fired. The ball struck the keg's fuse housing. Sparks showered. Shaw's eyes widened, then the powder inside the keg ignited prematurely. A white-hot bloom swallowed the tunnel. Shaw's scream cut short as stone and flesh became the same red mist. But the blast also took the ceiling. Chunks of rock crashed. Water gushed through a new fissure, cold and black. The sea cave groaned like a dying whale. 012. Isla shoved the grate with new desperation. Elias joined her, shoulder screaming. The iron screamed louder, then gave way with a shriek that echoed the fort's death rattle. They plunged into the churning water below. 007. Underwater, the world muted to bubbles and heartbeat. Salt stung open cuts. Elias kicked toward the pale coin of moonlight above. Isla's hand clamped his wrist, pulling, not up but sideways. She'd spotted the hidden inlet her father once used, a narrow fissure in the cliff face, wide enough for a longboat if the tide was right. They surfaced inside a cathedral of dripping stone. The Revenant, Elias's old ship, scuttled and half-sunk, lay canted on its side, masts broken but hull intact. A lantern glowed from its shattered cabin window. 003. Elias hauled himself aboard, lungs burning. Isla followed, water streaming from her hair like liquid starlight. They collapsed on the warped deck as the fort's final explosion thundered across the bay. A pillar of fire rose, lighting the sky the same red as the doubloon Elias had lost in the tavern. For a moment, only the sound of their ragged breathing and the lapping tide. Then a voice, soft, male, amused, floated from the cabin. "Welcome home, Captain." Elias's blood turned to ice. He knew that voice. Gideon. The mute giant from the cell, Shaw's supposed informant, stood in the doorway holding a lit fuse in one hand and a cutlass in the other. Behind him, crates marked navy powder lined the hold. Midnight. Did you truly think the governor would leave your ship unguarded? Gideon smiled, torch reflecting in eyes as dead as a shark's. Tick-tock, Captain. The Revenant sails at sunrise, one way or another. The fuse hissed toward the powder. Elias's hand found Isla's. They had survived fire, betrayal, and the sea itself. Now they had 48 inches of spark to decide whether they would become legends or ghosts. The fuse's last ember kissed the powder keg, then died, pinched out between Isla's thumb and forefinger slick with seawater and blood. Silence roared louder than any explosion. Gideon's grin twisted into disbelief. Elias used the heartbeat to drive his shoulder into the giant's gut. They crashed among the powder crates, splinters flying like grape shot. Isla snatched the torch from Gideon's grip, reversed it, and slammed the iron head across his temple. The mute giant folded, out cold before his knees hit the deck. Dawn's first orange blade cut through the broken cabin roof, turning smoke into molten gold. Elias straightened, chest heaving. 48 inches of fuse lay spent at Isla's feet, 48 inches between resurrection and obliteration. He looked at the girl who had once been cargo and saw, instead, a captain born in fire. The Revenant groaned beneath them, wounded but seaworthy. Water lapped at the scuppers where cannon ports gaped like missing teeth, yet the hull held. Elias knelt beside Gideon, rifling pockets until his fingers closed on a folded parchment, Navy orders stamped with the governor's seal. The words chilled him hotter than any flame. Sink the pirate vessel. Display carcass and cargo in Kingston Square. No survivors. Isla Morgan, wanted alive for interrogation. He showed it to Isla. She read without flinching, then crumpled the paper and tossed it into the rising sun. Orders are just ink, she said. We write new ones. Above them, the mainmast, snapped in the scuttling, still flew a tattered black rag Elias had once called his flag. The skull was moth-eaten, the hourglass cracked, the promise of no quarter now a mockery. He reached up, fingers brushing the rotting cloth. Time to finish what we started, he murmured. Isla disappeared below, returning with a bolt of sailcloth still smelling of tar and brine. In her other hand she carried Thomas Morgan's white shell, unbroken despite every storm. Together they spread the canvas across the deck. Elias drew his dagger, not for blood this time but for paint. He sliced his palm, let red drip, and with Isla guiding his shaking hand, they painted a single white hourglass upright upon a field of black. Beneath it, 4 words in salt-stained scarlet: "No more debts." The wind caught the new flag as they hoisted it. It snapped like a gunshot, the hourglass streaming sideways like sand racing toward justice. From the harbor, the fort's ruins still belched smoke, a beacon to every bounty hunter and navy cutter within 100 leagues. But the Revenant, half sunk, half legend, answered with a roar of its own. Isla took the wheel. "Course?" she asked. Elias glanced at the horizon where the sun now blazed full, turning the sea to molten copper. "West," he said. "Past Kingston, past Cartagena, past every map that still calls us criminals. We sail until the world forgets the names on those warrants." Behind them Gideon stirred, groaned. Elias bound the giant with his own fuse, knotting it like a promise. "You'll testify," he told the dazed trader. "Governor's orders in your pocket, powder crates in the hold. Kingston will want to hear both sides." Isla laughed, clear, fierce, free. "Let them chase. We've got wind, water, and a flag that says the debt is paid." As the Revenant limped toward open sea, dawn painted their shadows long across the deck, 2 silhouettes against a banner no empire had ever flown. Below the waterline, barnacles clung like metals. Above it, the hourglass bled sunlight instead of sand. Elias felt the weight lift, not the weight of gold but of ghosts. Somewhere behind them, Thomas Morgan's spirit smiled from a gallows long gone. Ahead, the horizon offered only blank parchment and endless ink-blue waves. Isla turned to him, hair whipping like a battle pennant. "What do we call ourselves now?" Elias looked at the flag, at the girl steering like she'd been born to it, at the sea opening its arms. "Not pirates," he said. "Not privateers. Just sailors who remember kindness costs more than gold, and pay it anyway." The Revenant crested the first wave, prow slicing sunrise into scattered diamonds. Behind them, Tortuga's smoke pillar dwindled to a memory. Ahead, storm clouds gathered, purple and bruised, but the wind filled their sails true.